the research process. How do we carry out research? We've all gone through this 8-9 step research process model. There's nothing new in this, but then when I talk about each of it, I will put in something that could be for take home. Right? So, starting from the research process, and announcement for all, the total roads will be made available to everyone. If you want to write, which is not there in the slide. Okay? Whatever is on the slide is yours. So in any case, you don't have to write that. This is deliverables, basically methodology, under methodology we'll be looking at the process. Starting from here, I don't think there's anything new in this, okay? But then, researchers, a systematic process of collecting data, analyzing that data, and bringing out a new insight. You start with known. Okay, you start with known facts. That means you carry out some review literature on the topic that you've selected. That means what others have done on that in that area. That means you start from the known, and then from that known, you develop an area which probably is less researched, or which others have researched, but there's some time that has already elapsed, or the area has been researched in different contexts, maybe economic, social, okay, or any other context. So the context changes, so you find the findings change. So basically, you start from known, okay, and then from that known, or the problem, you start from the problem, decide the research design, or before you start the actual research design for your research, you may carry out some exploratory research work so that you can actually identify what is the research problem and what are the objectives that you can set for that. And then systematically you decide the actual research design for your actual major research. And that research design would also include your sample design. Okay, so what sampling technique would you use, what would be your population, what would be sampling frame, and what would be the sample size, etc. Those parts would be included in the design. And then next would be actually designing your tools for data collection. That would include designing a questionnaire, etc. Right? And from then on, you move on to data collection. From data collection to analysis, to the interpretation of the results, findings, and then discussion of those findings, writing report. Right? So we know that this is a systematic process of carrying out a work and a research, and therefore research is not just inquisitiveness, as I stated earlier. Right? So gathering information from resources such as books, magazines is not research, because it doesn't contribute to new knowledge. I talked about it. Now, these are the stages in research, and we majority of us are conversant with this. So instead of going through the topics, if you look at this, research process is a cyclic process. As I said, it starts from the problem, and from problem you go through all these stages that I talked about, and it leads to new problems, or it leads to areas that need research. Problem doesn't necessarily mean which is hindering work. Problem is the area that needs to be researched. So it will lead to areas that need further research. So therefore, you find that it's a cyclic process, and therefore starting and ending at times, identifying what is the starting point and identifying where to stop. actually becomes difficult because while carrying out research, you find that there is a new area that needs further research. So should you continue with that new area, identify solution to that? That would lead to a new problem again. So you continue working. So where do you stop? Naturally, it is the resources that you have: time, money, people, right? That should limit you to where do you stop, right? So basically, it's a cyclic process, research. Now, initially when you start with, okay, you need to identify an area that you would like to receive carry out research on, and that is the research problem or research question that you would like to answer, or a question that you would like to answer through your research work, right? So that is where you start. There are a number of sources from where you get this research question, right? One, observation, that you observe your surroundings, you observe the work that is being carried out by others, you observe products, you observe advertisements, there's lots of things that you observe, and that may give you an idea that that this is the area I should be researching on. So one way of getting the identifying problem is through observation. Second is literature review. In fact, when you start, basically when you want to start your PhD, there are a number of research scholars here, and therefore it is important for them to understand that when you start your PhD work, you want to identify the topic for your research, for your PhD work, you start from the broad area that you would like to work in. Right? Like say if you are in marketing area and you would like to work in marketing area naturally on your PhD work, but in marketing there are a number of areas: advertising, brand image, brand image changes because of number of through advertisement or through sponsorships. Whether you want to work on any one of them, consumer behavior, you could be working on consumer behavior, you could be working on product development. So there are a number of areas that you could work on. So you identify a broader area. Broader area does not mean marketing. Broader area would be whether you want to work on consumer behavior, you want to work on advertising, if you want to work on brand image development, or you want to work on product development. These would be broader areas, right? So once you've decided the broader areas, next step would be for PhD you would go for, because it is not a sponsored research. Because if there is a sponsored research, somebody would tell you the problem, that this is the problem or this is the area I want you to research, right? But for PhD, you need to decide. So therefore, next step in identifying your problem, because problem is still not identified, the actual real topic for your research is still not identified. Next step is to carry out review of literature in that broader area. Now this total review may not form part of your actual research work that you will carry out later on, because this review is carried out for identifying your topic or identifying the research problem itself. So actual real review for your PhD would start after you identify the topic. Number of times I've seen that a research scholar goes to the guide, and guide tells the research scholar, okay, carry out research on this, as if the professor had a lot of topics put in his pocket and he takes out one and gives it to the research scholar. That's not a right process of identifying the topic for carrying out research. Alright, so as I said, literature review is the next source of identifying the problem for carrying out research. Because when you carry out a review of broader area, you identify the gaps which are not researched that much. Because if you look at any area, okay, in management or medical science or sociology, psychology, you look at any area, you find some research might have already been done in all those areas. So research searching again. And it is not that you are developing something entirely new. That is not necessary. That through research you only identify or develop a new thing. Okay? You can also improve on what is already existing. So therefore, literature review is an essential component of any research. So that's the second source of identifying your problem, identifying gap, where work has not been done in the setting in which you want to carry out the work. Right? Third is professional conferences. You attend a lot of conferences, a lot of people present some papers on that, and also present what is the next. Because findings of a particular research should point towards the area that needs to be further research. Every research should lead to an area for further research. Since it leads to further research, so naturally that is another source of identifying problems, research problems for research experts. As I said, in case of PhD, it is the guide, PhD guide, who could be expert, or in case of say general research, you might find some experts in the area who can tell you which area you should select for research. Could be an organization wherein, say, a senior executive who is working in the organization knows what is the problem in the organization, so he asks for research to be carried out in that area, taking that problem. So problem may come from the sponsoring organization, right? So that is last one, sponsoring organization, that the problem may also be given by the sponsoring organization that you need to work on this. Like say if an organization finds that the motivation level of employees in the organization, or it might just find that the turnover of its employees is high and wants to research that the turnover of our employee is high, I want you to carry out the research why, and suggest solution to that, or you just tell us why and solution will automatically be found out by the organization, right? So that would be, now generally you find in all these areas, some of them would indicate towards symptoms only and not the real problem. Review of literature may lead you to the real problem that you can investigate. For all others, you find observation, professional conferences, expert sponsoring organizations, you might only get these symptoms, right? And then you need to, that means the real problem is not known. Or problem is known, but the objectives are not clear. In both these cases, for defining the next step, because first you identify the problem, next is define the problem. Prepare an operational definition of the problem, the way you are going to research it, right? And for doing that, you need to understand the problem and the objectives both clearly. So you may need exploratory research to understand it further. At times, you may go for that. Now, if you look at, okay, you might find that you are able to detect only symptoms. Like an organization, as I said, has said that employee turnover is the problem, and we would like you to investigate. The actual reason may be that the organization is not doing well financially, and people do not see their career growing in the organization, and therefore they are leaving the organization. So the problem is elsewhere. You are looking at a HR problem, human resources problem. People are leaving, so they may not be motivated enough, or they may not be satisfied with the organization. The organizational culture might not be such that it can sustain people. The hint is towards that, whereas the real problem is elsewhere. It's a financial problem. The organization is not doing well financially, right? So when you carry out exploratory research, you will be able to identify the correct problem and you will be able to define that. So an exploratory research may lead to clarity in the problem and framing the objectives. You may need to carry out exploratory research, you may not need to. Not all problems actually require exploratory research. Okay, the problem is clear, objectives are clear, you can straight away go to the main research. Okay, statement of research objective is the end result of an exploratory research at times. Now, this is this continuing part, next part of the process. That is, it's a clubbing of two sections. That is, after next step of exploratory research is design, the research design. Okay, selecting a research design for carrying out your research. Next step is to select out of number of research designs that are possible, selecting a particular research design for carrying out your research. Right? You know, first part, problem discovery. You may already directly you can come to this problem definition. You can see the dotted arrow. It can come directly to that, or you find that you may have to go for some exploratory research, and then you may be able to define the problem. You can see that rule, right? So either direct or through the exploratory research, you should be able to define your problem correctly. Next step is to select the basic research methods or research design. All right, those you find that there are. First, you need to select type of research. What kind of research you are carrying out? As I had said, one was exploratory research. In fact, number of researches end there. That means exploratory research itself is incomplete research. That means you use only exploratory research to come to your findings. So that's one type of research. Second is descriptive research. Right? You describe the current situation, what has happened over a period of time. Both would come under descriptive research. And the third is causal research. Okay, that is, you identify cause and effect, relationship between different variables. So we also call it experimental research. The third part, we also call it experimental research, because cause and effect relationship, as soon as we say, we are looking at one variable which is independent variable, which we can modify, we can change. And there is another variable that we call it dependent variable, and we need to evaluate the effect of this change in the independent variable on the dependent variable. So by nature, causal effect is experimental research. Okay. So and you find, so you can carry out whether, and all these can be carried out. Say exploratory research can be carried out using survey. In fact, causal research also can be carried out using survey. Descriptive also can be carried out using survey. That means when you have decided whether to go for exploratory, descriptive or causal, so you may use one of these methods, survey, experiment, secondary data study or observation. Methods of carrying out this research. Once you start decided the basic research, that is, I will do exploratory research, I will do descriptive research or causal, then you decide what will be the method used for collecting data, right? So either survey would be used for collecting data, or experiment would be, or secondary data would be used, or observation would be used for, method would be used for collecting data. So you select one of those. All these are suitable in certain circumstances we will be looking at later on. Not every method is suitable for all kinds of research. So it all depends on your objectives of the study. Depending upon your objectives of the study, you will select here. So these will be selected based on the objectives of your study. Whether survey would be used, or experimental design experiment would be used, or secondary data will be the basis of or will be the data used for analysis, or observation method will be used for collecting data. It depends on the objectives and the design that you decided. Further, if you look at the process, you find, starting from the block that we left, survey, experimental, secondary data. Next step in the design itself. So design is a three parts process. Designing the type of study, designing the method of collecting data, and the third one is sample design. And with that sample design, you would look at what would be the populations for the study, what would be the sample frame, what will be the sample size, what will be the element who will be the respondent, that means element for data collection, and the sample size, right? So these 4 or 5 things need to be addressed at sample design, right? So others are all self-explanatory. Only one part number of you might not have heard, and that is sample frame. Now, what is this sample frame? Population, you know that if you want to, and how do you select the population? The population is selected based on for whom would you like to generalize the results. Right? You would get some results based on your sample. Right? So generally, all types of researches are carried out using sample. You generally do not go for the 100% enumeration. You don't collect data from all the members of the population. Generally, it is not possible also. So you go for sample selection. But for selecting sample, you need to first identify what is the population. Right? And how do you identify the population? Your first objective, right? That is your main objective of the study. For whom would you like this? The results that you get would like them to be generalized for. If you want your results to be generalized for whole population of India, so population of India would become the population for your study. If you want your results to be generalized for, say, Gwalior, so the population of Gwalior would become your population. You may like that your results to be generalized for college-going students at Gwalior, or a B-grade city like Gwalior. So you might collect data from 2-3 such B-grade cities like Gwalior, not alone Gwalior naturally, and you may be able to generalize for B-grade cities like Gwalior. Right? So you need to first look at for whom you want to generalize, then select the population for the study. From this population, whatever method you use for collecting data would decide your sample frame. Right? If you are using, say, interview, right? So you need the people, you need the list of people who could be contacted. Okay? If you want to go for random sampling, you need the complete list of people, and you have problems there. That is, you have a list which does not include everybody. Like say if you select people who have landlines, telephones, and get a list from agencies that provide landlines, and you select that this will be the total population from where you will draw your sample. Now, there was originally you decided that your research findings should generalize for whole of, say you are doing the research at Gwalior, for whole of Gwalior. Now you decided that you will collect data through telephonic interviews, and the base that you are going to use is the landlines. So there are lists that are available, landline users, lists that are available. You will use them for deciding the population from where you will draw your sample. Now there is a difference between the total population of Gwalior and the population you are actually using for drawing your sample. Now the next part is your sample frame, and larger this difference, the more the error. Right? More the problem in generalizing your results for Gwalior. Right? So, but the method that you are going to use for data collection would decide your sample frame. If you are say collecting data through, you are developing a online say questionnaire. You are collecting data through online classes. Naturally, all the people who have access to internet would only be able to do it, and the ones who are conversant, in filling up such survey questionnaires online would only be the ones who might respond, and the response may not be dependent on the researcher. It is dependent on the respondents. That whoever wants to respond would respond. So naturally, such the sample frame would be the ones who are using this, not the ones who are responding. Responding would be the sample. is sample size. Sample size, there have been a lot of, I have seen a lot of people have a lot of anxiety in deciding what should be the sample size for my research. Okay, and since I'm talking about sample size here, I would not work out with the formula right now because that I will do during sampling distribution. So right here, I will tell you that there are two methods that are used for deciding the sample size: thumb rule and a statistical formula. I will work out the statistical formula for you when I do the sampling distribution. But right now, I will talk about only thumb rules. For all your parametric tools, parametric statistical tools, and I will tell you where parametric tools apply. So for all your parametric statistical tools, sample size should be 10 times of the number of statements in your questionnaire or in your measure. Whatever tool you are using. That means whatever number of dimensions you are evaluating, 10 times of that. Right? If you are using, say, observation as a method, now what are the dimensions you are observing? 10 times of that should be the sample size. If you are using a questionnaire, whatever are the number of statements in the questionnaire, 10 times of that. Now, again there is a confusion here. A questionnaire may contain number of variables. I mean, it depends on the individual how he or she perceives a questionnaire. When I say questionnaire, it is a single variable questionnaire. A questionnaire that actually measures a single variable and not multiple variables. Okay? But then when you carry out a study, you have multiple variables and you have questionnaires for each one of them, and you are using summated scale. Summated scale means there are number of statements and you are using totals for analysis. Totals on all these statements you are using for analysis. So you are using summated scales. So in that case, the sample size will be decided based on the longest questionnaire and not the addition of all the statements on all the questionnaires. The longest, the variable that has longest questionnaire, that will be used as the basis for deciding your sample size. Suppose if you have three variables, say customer loyalty, customer satisfaction, and brand image. Right? These are the three variables. Say you are trying to evaluate the effect of brand image and customer satisfaction on customer loyalty. These are the three variables you are evaluating. Now, whichever is the longest questionnaire out of these three, brand image, customer satisfaction, and customer loyalty, generally it is brand image, that would decide what would be the sample size. Multiply those number of statements in that questionnaire, multiply by 10. Right? That would be the, and it is justified because this thumb rule is acceptable worldwide. It is not that it is acceptable in Indian research or Indian journals accept it. No, it is accepted worldwide, this multiplication by 10. So this thumb rule is perfectly okay. Later on we will see whether the statistical formula will solve your problem or will complicate your problems. Right? So we will see that. So sampling design, and we know number of times, 99% of the time non-probability sampling is used. So when you are using probability sampling, through hypothesis test, you are able to eliminate or you are able to calculate what is the error, sampling error, and sampling error is taken care of in hypothesis testing. While testing your hypothesis, sampling error is taken care of. But if you are using non-probability, then in addition to the sampling error, you have systematic error, which cannot be taken care of through sampling. That means we need to ensure that our systematic error is minimized and it doesn't affect your results. There is no way of calculating systematic error and taking care of it in analysis. So therefore we need to ensure that the systematic error is minimized. There is another part, and that is design error. Okay? The study design error or research design error. There are number of research design errors. There are 6, 7 of them. So we will look at that also. We need to minimize those errors through proper design. Okay, we need to use a proper research design so that those errors are also minimized. So 2 errors you need to minimize through your systematic error is minimized through administration. That means how you design your questionnaire, how you administer your questionnaire, and design errors are minimized through using a robust design, which will not be affected by these errors. I will come back to that when we look at research design. Right? Correction of data, we know that that will add to the systematic error will be introduced there. So we will see what are those systematic errors and how to eliminate them. Next, editing and coding of data. Number of times we create problems here. Editing of data does not permit you to remove responses or change responses. Editing of data is not for that. Editing of data is removing the complete response of the respondent who was not given response on all the statements that you wanted, right? Or somebody who has given responses in extremes. You can also remove them, and that can be removed through analysis also later on as outliers, right? We can analyze the data that we have got, and we can identify outliers and we can remove them later on also. But then at this stage, if you remove it, it is okay. But it is not for changing any response that you received. Right? No such authority is there to the researcher that he or she can change the responses that have been received from respondents. So editing does not allow you that. Next is coding. And generally coding, we use numerical codes because numerical codes are easier to analyze through statistical methods, and therefore numerical codes are used. And while doing this, please keep a record. We actually make mistakes at times that we put it, we write down the codes in our Excel sheet itself, and we forget to write them elsewhere, record them elsewhere. Like say in the Excel sheet, when I get the questionnaires, say I have given 1 to male, 2 to female, and then I forget whether 1 was male or female. Right? And this happens very, very commonly. That is, we forget later on whether 1 was given to male or 1 was given to female. That means whenever you are doing coding, you need to develop a sheet wherein you write what code has been used for what and keep it safe, so that later on you don't make mistakes. Alright, same is the case with ordinal scales, where you are having say a 5-point ordinal scale, say most often, average number of times, rarely or very rarely. You are doing something, you are doing that, you are observing on that. Again you start giving codes to them. Very rarely, suppose you start from 1 and very commonly you give 5, or you give reverse. That means 1 to very often and 5 to very rare. Now you take this data for analysis, and there you say that higher mean indicates most often. And this is again a serious problem, because while coding you are not taking care. Right? Very often you give 1 and very rarely you give 5 code. And now it has become ulta. Isn't it? And these are common errors and very good researchers actually make these mistakes and later on have problems, right? So therefore it is always better smaller values should get 1 and higher values should get 5, so that you will never make mistake. Okay, and keep a record. How you have codified, keep a record. Next step is punching this data into Excel sheet. And there I will tell you SPSS or any statistical software uses a particular pattern, and you must feed data in that pattern itself, so that later on you don't need to transpose. You can change that. You can take a transpose of the matrix that you have fed in, and rows can become columns and columns can become rows. later on, but then why get into that problem? Okay, so therefore, initially itself, you know that the data has to be fed. Okay, in Excel sheet, and all the statistical softwares also use a sheet that is similar to Excel sheet. Okay, so you have columns here and you have rows here. Alright, so in rows you would write respondents. Respondents in rows. Respondent number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. Okay, and responses or elements or statements. Okay, in the questionnaire, statement number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, number of statements. This is the structure that is used because this is the structure that your statistical software has assumed. That this is how you have fed the data. And since they assume this, we must follow this. Okay? Respondents in rows and responses in columns. Alright. Editing and coding data, feeding data into Excel sheet. Then is data processing and analysis. That is generally done using one of the statistical softwares. We will be using SPSS. In fact, PASW 18 is the software that we have licensed. So we will be using that software for analysis in this workshop. But you can use, we asked sister people to come and make presentation. The basic reason was that it is a cheaper software, far cheaper to SPSS or PSW, and it has two important parts that are in addition to SPSS. One is that it has confirmatory factor analysis and structural equation modeling built in, and two is that time series data. Analysis of time series is not part of SPSS, but analysis of time series is part of SysTax. So with one software, all the areas and even the quality aspects that are there in SPSS also now. So you find there are a few other things that was there. So I thought it would be a useful presentation maybe that we can adopt that software. So data processing you can use any, but we will be using PSW. So you can transfer data from your Excel sheet to this, and then you can carry out whatever analytical part, inferential statistical tools that you want to use, or descriptive statistical tools. Two are there, two sets. Total statistical tools can be divided into descriptive and inferential. We will be looking at what tool to use when tomorrow morning. So I'll leave it to that. Interpretation of findings. I would like to only give 2-3 suggestions here, and those are very, very important. Interpretation should be as per the results. And we can't interpret the say review of literature here. Okay, you find that while carrying out the off-record statements made by your respondents, you can't analyze, you can't interpret those statements while carrying out interpretation here. Interpretation would be the statistical result that you get. And there is a proper interpretation for each of the results. So when you get a results, you need to interpret it according to that. So, and we will be looking at all the tests, and I will be talking about how to interpret each of the tables that you get. Right? So therefore, we will learn that interpretation part also along with the analytical analysis of data that we will be doing tomorrow and day after tomorrow and so on. So data processing and analysis, interpretation and findings. Interpretation can be part of the analysis. After analysis, you carry out the interpretation. These can be together, that is table of analysis, and the interpretation will be together. Discussion can either be combined together with the results, or it can be separate. part. In the same chapter or a different chapter, both can be done. Okay? So in discussion, you are talking about your findings and trying to support those findings with the other findings. That means you need to reference. You need to develop the reference support for your results. Or if your results are in contradiction to other research, even those can be quoted. That others' findings were this, but my findings or the findings of the current study are these. Right? So those have to be included in under discussion. It generally it is like an essay. Okay, this discussion is like an essay on the topic that you selected, and that essay uses a lot of references that would support or that those are in contradiction to your findings. Right? So you build a case for your results here in the discussion, and finally you prepare a report. We have a session on PhD thesis. That means how to or what is to be included in each part of PhD, or how to prepare a PhD thesis. We have a session on that. So I will be talking about report that time, because whether it's a research paper, I'm combining there the technical research paper, the PhD thesis, all I will be combining in one. And I have given a presentation that is available in your kit. Okay, so that presentation, and in fact, all these presentations that I am going to make, they are already there. In fact, more of them. Some of the presentations that I am not going to do in the workshop, I have provided, so that you can go home and carry out a research methodology workshop. You plan a research methodology workshop and carry it out there. Right? So use them for your benefit. So this is about the process. Alright, so